Hi all. I guess we're still waiting for folks to come in. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So I guess we could get started at like 5:20 for just in case if there are any stragglers or whatever.
Okay.
Oh, hi, Brandon. Sorry. I didn't have my headphones and stuff on.
Hi.
Abdul?
Yes. Hey, how's it going?
It's going all right. Hi, Matthew. I don't think we've met before.
No, we haven't met, but I know your wife obviously coming out of the Department of Political Science out of Clark, Atlanta.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to
Yeah.
meet you.
Yeah, she came when I was just about leaving. I think she was teaching in Boston, right? Boston.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Are you still in Atlanta or?
No, actually I'm in Tallahassee now. I got a assistant professor there at FAMU, Florida A&M University.
Oh, cool. Cool.
And I'll be presenting with my colleague today, Dr. Armstrong, Brandon Armstrong.
Brandon, hello. Matthew, I don't think we've met either, have we?
No, we haven't. Hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you.
Doing well. Are you guys in person at FAM this semester or virtual?
We it's like a little mix. So we have like high flex courses where some of the courses that we are teaching we have to be like in person. However, we're still teaching like virtually, and the students have the option to come to class, but we have to be there. Um, through the mandate.
Okay, that's
Yeah, the politics of the state out of when they required everyone to be there from the top of a lot of it's a lot of pushback, but it's good though. The students are learning, so it's the key thing. But yeah.
and it's been fine. There haven't been outbreaks or anything like that.
No, it's been pretty we've been doing pretty well with that. We have a huge, well, not a huge testing center, but we have a on-site testing center where they test constantly for COVID. Like you can just walk up to the stadium, our football stadium, and you can just walk right in and get tested. So that's pretty cool. And I don't know if they're going to set up a site for vaccines as well. So, and that's right in the heart of the around the surrounding areas of our so the local community is welcome to that as well as the faculty and the staff at the university. So that's good.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
You know where we're located, like most HBCUs, we're located right in the heart of predominantly Black neighborhoods. So that's good. And you're at Morehouse, right? Still, or
Yes, we're virtual this semester. They are, hoping to get us back in person in the fall.
I'm a Spelman graduate. Hello.
Hello.
Matt Platt, what's going on, man?
Doing well, but I prefer Matthew instead of Matt.
Oh, okay.
Precisely to avoid people's rhyming.
Matt Platt. Are you presenting? You're not presenting one of these, are you? Are you one of the discussers? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
I didn't look to see who else is on here. Are you presenting on this too?
No. I just finished presenting one. I'm curious.
Okay. What year are you at the UNC?
Second year.
Second year. Okay.
So
is that then pre-comp?
Yes.
Do you guys have comprehensive exams in that?
Yeah, third year, beginning of the third year. See, I'm terrified, but fingers crossed.
Is it a terrifying process there? I know different people, different places do things in a different way.
Yeah, no, I think you're terrifying across the board, everywhere. I think everywhere.
I don't know. I was not terrified during mine. Because it was written. I had the choice of doing 8 hours a day for 3 days, or 24 hours in one day. And I was like, let's just get it out of the way. And so I did it all. I took about 9 hours, and then I was done. I was like, all right, great.
It's savagery. You got ice water in your veins. I don't feel the same. I'll prepare all summer, but I'm super nervous leading up to this thing. Golly, these comps. At least there's no verbal. We don't have a verbal section.
But my view, I view the whole thing as like hazing. I don't really.
Yeah.
if I were, creating my own department from scratch, we definitely would not have comprehensive exams.
Yeah.
I'm just listening to this conversation, and though I'm like a third-year professor, I still remember comps, and like this is all just triggering to me. I'm just like, oh, you don't have verbals? Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can use that to transition. It's 5:20 into the panel. So, hi, this is Black Evaluations of Political Elites. I am the chair and discussant, Brianna Mack. I am a professor of politics and government, assistant professor of politics and government at Ohio Wesleyan University. And today we will be hearing from three individuals. We have Matthew Platt at Morehouse College. He will be presenting Sorting Through the Effects of Race, Partisanship, and Policy on Congressional Approval. And then afterwards, we'll hear from Abdul Sharif and Brandon Armstrong at FAMU. Their paper is All for One and One for All, Exploring Black Voter Candidate Preferences in the State of Florida. And so I will then turn the stage over to these gentlemen, and then afterwards I'll provide comments, and then we can open up for discussion.
All right.
And so you can like click share screen. And...
Oh, am I going first?
oh, my bad. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So my name is Matthew Platt. I'm professor at Morehouse College, and the title of my talk today is Black, or Blackity Black, looking at race and legislative behavior on legislative attitude, on constituent attitudes. So when we think about Black representation, right, so in its simplest form, we can say, all right, this person is kind of phenotypically Black, and is that enough? And so that's kind of our simplest kind of descriptive representation. And so someone like Allen West would be an example of this, kind of a person who was in Congress, and he happens to be Black, but it's not entirely clear that his Blackness is part of his political program per se, or that his racial identification matters that much for his politics, which does not necessarily stem just from the fact that he's conservative. One can be both conservative and a Black conservative. But in West's case, it seems from his public presentation, he's more of a conservative politician who just happens to be Black, as opposed to a Black politician in the way we might think of it. The second, you might have like Black representation. So someone like the Obama's pictured here, where they at least identify and fit in with what we think of as kind of mainstream cultural Blackness. So the descriptive nature of their representation is not just in their kind of phenotypical traits, but also in the sense that they kind of identify and want to signify to others that they are like you in some way, right? And so part of, I think, Obama's symbolic presidency was doing things to show Black people that it mattered that he was in the White House because he was like you. And so there's that important kind of symbolic kind of descriptive representation. But what I'm most interested in is Blackity-Black representation, right? So this is the real thing, as in you're a Black person in Congress or in some higher office, and you are actually trying to push forward a Black agenda, that you are trying to engage in Black politics, where that means the issues that Black Americans care about that would better their lives, that would improve their lived experience, that's what you are placing at the top of your own priorities, and that's how you identify and view your mission as a member of Congress. And so this just lists kind of the top 10 sponsors of Black issue bills from 1947 to 2016. And so you can look at the list, and I think it kind of matches with what you might expect for the most part, right? Someone like Augustus Hawkins, Charles Rangels, Mickey Leland, John Conyers, Sheila Jackson Lee, these are people that most would agree fit into our standard of what we think about as kind of Black members of Congress, that they are engaged not just descriptively, but also trying to do something kind of substantively for their representation. The question for me in this talk today is, do these kinds of distinctions matter to constituents themselves? So are they fine with just having a Black face? Do they want some sort of Black cultural affirmation, or do they want Black agenda setting? And so what is the relationship between constituent attitudes and the introduction of Black issue bills is the question that's guiding this project. And my expectation is that members who introduce more of these Black issue bills should have higher approval ratings from their Black constituents than those who do not. And this is something that I'm trying to kind of expand into a bigger thing. This is kind of the first stab at the data, and so we'll see what the preliminary results show. Where I'm getting the data from is the CCS kind of cumulative data file that has all of their things from 2016, 2006, and I cite at 2016. I believe now it extends all the way up to 2019. And then the bill sponsorship data is taken from me. I've got bill sponsorship originally from the Congressional Bills Project, and then I've coded all of those for Black members from 1947 to 2016 as to whether or not these bills are Black issue bills or not. We could get into what do I mean by Black issues. You will almost inevitably disagree with me, and that's fine. That's been my life for the past 12 years. And then member ideology is measured through nominate scores. So the first thing is to just look at kind of a proportion who approve compared to race and by whether or not you are a co-partisan. So obviously people who are of the same party as their member of Congress tend to like them more than they like members of the opposite party. And that's what we see here. And so one idea might be, well, that the differences that we see based on race could really just be driven all by partisanship. Since Black people are Democrats, then they don't like the Black members who are not Democrats, or Black people who are Republican don't like the Black people who are Democrat, or right, that the racial differences in party identification would just be translating into approval. And so what we see here is that that's not, I think, the full story. That we see that even among co-partisans, or even among people who are not of the same partisanship, we still see some differences across race. So that there's something else driving this. And one of the things that motivated me in the literature is work originally by Claudine Gay, The Spirals of Trust in 2002, I think, where she is investigating the question of whether or not the good feelings that Black constituents have from being descriptively represented, if that extends to broader legitimacy of Congress itself. And she finds that basically it does not. And some other work in the aughts by Griffin and Flavin, and I think Griffin and Keene, when they look at congressional approval, one thing that they find is, again, these kind of stark racial differences where basically Black people are fine not having a Black representative, but white people very much are not okay with not having white representatives. And you see that here, right? Especially when you're not of the same party. And so now I've incorporated the measure of Black issue bills. So what I did, right, I matched up all of the districts and the individual members of Congress in the CCS, match it up to their bill sponsorship, and then include that in our analysis here. So what this is showing is kind of the raw data of the proportion who approve as we increase the number of Black issue bills that member introduces, and as we distinguish by the race of the not member of Congress here, because we're only looking at Black members of Congress. So this is the race of the constituent. And so, and then these are kind of lowest curves to see if there's any kind of general trends. And so this would suggest that it doesn't really matter that much, that yes, we have this kind of racial difference, but increasing the number of Black issue bills doesn't really seem to do much in terms of approval. It's pretty flat. Whereas for white constituents, if anything, it's perhaps a slightly negative trend here. So this would suggest kind of much ado about nothing. But then did a little kind of regression to kind of poke around at it, where our dependent variable is do you approve, and then I allowed race and copartisanship to interact with one another. And here you see, I think, more interesting results, where what we're seeing here is that for Black people, for Black constituents, now as their member of Congress engages in more Black agenda setting, their approval rises along with it, even if they are not themselves of the same party. Which means we can see that from kind of both sides, that on the one hand, someone like a Tim Scott as a senator who does introduce kind of things about police brutality as part of his legislative portfolio, that his Black constituents, his Black Democratic constituents might still see that and say, I'm glad that he's doing that. And they think better of Tim Scott as a result of him engaging in those kinds of Black issue bill sponsorship. Whereas looking at the red lines here, it's not quite the same story for the white constituents, where they are even that those who are of the same party, this is slightly negative. Now, if we put confidence intervals on this, these might not be kind of real differences here. I haven't actually tried. And then for the people who are not copartisans, there's largely kind of a flat line. There's not a whole lot going on. But again, I think it's instructive and gives us something to think about in terms of how race is actually interacting with partisanship to affect the way that constituents feel about their members of Congress. And so what I'm trying to do here is to bridge the gap between some of these literatures, that we have this bill sponsorship literature that is very much focused on how bills are used as signals to constituents. And then we have a literature about congressional approval that doesn't really focus very much on legislative behavior. And there's this kind of descriptive representation literature that focuses on how the existence of descriptive representation affects individual behavior in terms of participation or approval. And those literatures don't really speak that much to one another. So this is kind of a first attempt to put those things in kind of conversation. And so there's a lot more work to do, as one might imagine. In particular, I want to expand this beyond just looking at Black members to look at non-Black members of Congress as well, to see this kind of old race and representation question of descriptive versus substantive representation, and seeing if you have white members of Congress who are engaging in this kind of Black agenda setting behavior, does that earn them the same kind of points that it earns a Black member of Congress? So then this would allow me to vary not just the race of the constituent, but also the race of the member, to see what role race is really playing here. And so that's the next step. And thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we'll hear from Brandon and Sharif. Well, not Sharif, Abdul, I'm sorry.
That's fine. And we actually did a recorded PowerPoint presentation. So Dr. Armstrong is gonna go ahead and share and pull it up. So it's pre-recorded, and then if you all have any questions, of course, we'll have that discussion.
Hello, I'm Brandon Armstrong, and me and my colleague, Dr. Sharif, will be discussing this paper, All for One and One for All, exploring Black voter candidate preferences in the state of Florida.
Can everyone hear the presentation? Okay, great.
Research question. Our primary research question is, does the black vote operate as a monolithic when it comes to what they prefer in a candidate running for office? Our second research question is, when a black candidate is introduced on a presidential ticket, does ethnicity, gender, or party affiliation alter the overall opinions and preferences among black voters?
Introduction. From our preliminary research, we found that public opinion polling and survey research tend to treat black voting behavior as a monolithic group. This paper will examine what black voters in the state of Florida prefer in a candidate running for office through the lens of the different makeup of black ethnicities. In addition, this paper is also exploring the impact of when a black candidate is introduced on a presidential ticket by ethnicity, gender, or party affiliation. This study uses original survey data conducted after the 2020 presidential election. The paper advocates for future studies to explore the complexities of the black voters.
Background. Public opinion research tends to treat black voting behavior as a monolithic group. For example, earlier research on public opinion had the tendency to make bold statements, such as the Negroes were phenomenally liberal. These type of statements cast the idea that blacks are rejecting the police state while favoring the welfare state. However, in many locations in the United States, such as Florida, black voters come from various ethnicities and backgrounds. This paper will highlight the need to show the complexities of the black vote as it pertains to voting behavior patterns. For example, the impact of religion on political socialization of blacks. For example, research has shown that when it comes to certain issues, blacks can tend to be conservative as Republicans, which is shaped by religion. The whole notion that blacks can vote left but think right. However, blacks do come together and have some type of monolithic thought. This thought can come about through the idea of connectiveness, through the shared experiences of black individuals. And it's often by way of experiencing discrimination. Theoretical background. Here we're saying that the context surrounding the election's mobilization efforts, such as party activities and campaigning, can play a significant role in voter turnout at the state level. Previous studies used longitudinal methods to show that black voter turnout during presidential elections, such as 1984 and 1988, are associated with candidate preferences and political opposition. Within our paper, we used the example of Jesse Jackson and his run for president in 1984 and 1988. When Jackson ran for president, he received twice as many votes. Black and Hispanic turnout was much higher than in 1984. He also created a rainbow coalition that embodied various groups, and he also won several state primaries. And one thing Jackson did as well, he made other candidates address non-traditional types of issues. Previous research has also noted that when black voters get someone elected from their community, when I say your community, I'm referring to the black community, voter turnout in these areas revert back to normal and can have the tendency to drop in some areas and voting locations as well. This implies that mobilization activity that drove large numbers of black voters out to come vote may no longer be needed once that incorporation is met at the political level.
Theoretical background continued. Individuals who share the same ancestral origin tend to group together as they assimilate into society. A study that examined racial group consciousness among African Americans and black ethnics found that racial solidarity among blacks in America tend to hold firm among this group due to their shared experience of discrimination, ideology, interest, and leadership. Literature also provides evidence that the trust among blacks can be increased by providing opportunities for representation and democracy where blacks can achieve high levels of appointed and elected offices.
Hypothesis. Within our paper, we present a couple hypotheses. Our main prediction is that there is a difference in the black vote, which rejects the notion that they operate as a monolithic group. We do this by way of examining what the black voters prefer in a candidate running for office and what they least prefer in a candidate running for office. We examine both of these two areas by way of ethnicity. Here, we believe that they both will be statistically dependent. We also examine the impact of the selection of Senator Harris as the VP Democratic Party candidate. We do this by way of ethnicity, gender, and party affiliation. We believe in these three areas, the selection impact of Senator Harris as the VP Democratic candidate will be statistically dependent when looking at ethnicity, gender, and party affiliation. Methods. We conducted a survey of black voters in the state of Florida. We used 6 counties: Broward, Duval, Hillsborough, Leon, Miami-Dade, and Orange. All of these 6 counties have a high proportion rate of black voters. We use these counties as clusters. Within these clusters, we conducted a simple random sampling method. Our sample size for this study is 447. For this paper, we needed a targeted sample size of about 385. This will give us a 95% confidence level and 5% margin of error. This will be approximately about 64.1 per county. The sample used in the study closely reflects the makeup of black registered voters in the state. Within this paper, we have 3 response variables. The first, what registered black voters first preferred in a candidate running for office. The second, what registered black voters least preferred in the candidate running for office. And the third, the impact of the Democratic Party vice president selection, which in this case is a black woman candidate. We have 3 explanatory variables. Our first one is ethnicity, the second, gender, and the third is party affiliation. The type of analysis used in this paper are descriptive statistics. Results. Figure 1, on our y-axis, we have the frequency of first preferred in the candidate. On the x-axis, we have ethnicity. Figure 1 shows the differences among the ethnicities within the black vote and what they prefer in a candidate out of 7 options. Those options are highlighted in the legend. African Americans preferred a candidate that had strong family values with about 35%. This was also true for African Continental with 50% and Caribbean about 46%. Conversely, Hispanic or Latino preferred a candidate that valued economic policy with 50% over the other categories. Figure 2 is a bar plot of least preferred in the candidate running responses by ethnicity. Figure 2 shows the differences among ethnicities within the black vote and what they least preferred in the candidate out of 7 options. Those 7 options are once again highlighted in the legend. On the y-axis, we have the frequency of least preferred in the candidate. On the x-axis, we have ethnicity. Here, about 33% of different ethnic groups selected race. Within that 33%, African Americans made up 80.3%, while African Continental, Caribbean, and Hispanic or Latino made up the remaining 19.7%. Gender and age were also considered the next least preferred categories. African Americans ranked gender higher than age, with gender capturing about 23% and age with about 20%. However, the Caribbean and Hispanic or Latino ranked age higher than gender. Here we have figure 3, which is a bar plot of Democratic vice president selection impact by ethnicity. On the y-axis, we have the frequency of decisions, and on the x-axis, we have ethnicity. And In our legend, we have the three different options: discourage, encourage, or no influence. So, figure 3 shows the frequency of the question regarding Senator Harris's selection as the VP candidate during the 2020 presidential election for the Democratic Party. When it came to how different ethnicities within the black vote viewed Harris's selection, about 71% of all 4 of the different ethnic groups represented here overwhelmingly claimed that they were encouraged to vote because of her selection. However, about 26% of all of the 4 different ethnicities claimed that her selection had no influence on their decision on how they voted. And about 2.7% claimed that they were actually discouraged to vote. Here we have figure 4, which is a bar plot of the Democratic vice president selection impact by gender. On the y-axis, we once again have frequency of decisions. On the x-axis, we now have gender. In our legend, we have these 3 options, which is discourage, encourage, or no influence. So, figure 4 explores the frequency of the question regarding Senator Harris' selection as the VP candidate during the 2020 presidential election for the Democratic Party. Here, about 72.5% of female respondents were encouraged to vote when Harris was selected as the Democratic vice president candidate, along with 68.21% of male respondents. However, 25.76% of female respondents and 27.15% of male respondents mentioned that the decision of Harris's selection had no influence on their voting decision. Here we have figure 5. On the y-axis, we have the frequency of decisions, but now on the x-axis, we introduce party affiliation. As our legend, we still have those same 3 options: discourage, encourage, no influence. So, figure 5 uses party affiliation to explore the frequency of the question regarding Senator Harris's selection as the vice president candidate during the 2020 presidential election for the Democratic Party. Here, about 70.9% of all respondents claimed that they were encouraged to vote when Harris was selected as the Democratic vice president candidate, which was led by respondents who identified as Democrat, with 87.70%, then followed by non-party affiliates, with about 6%, and independents, with about 4.1%. However, 50% of Republican respondents and 66.67% of other affiliation respondents mentioned that the decision had no influence on their voting decision.
Discussion. Results from this study demonstrates that there needs to be a more intricate level of examination when surveying the opinions of Black voters. Our paper provides clear evidence that at different levels, Black voters have different opinions about what they prefer in a candidate running for office. We found that race was not a determining factor for what they prefer in a candidate, but family values and economic policies were top consideration. In addition, we found that the impact of the Democratic Party vice president selection of 2020 encouraged Black voters. However, it was interesting to see that some Black voters claimed not to be influenced by the pick.
Okay, thank you. So first, I'm going to provide some commentary for Matthew's paper, and then I will follow up with Brandon and Abdul. So let's see, pull up my comments for Matthew's paper. So I just lost my commentary. Oh no. So I wanted to start off by saying that a lot of my comments and questions are likely because I don't study Congress, and so like I do mass behavior as opposed to elite behavior. But the main question I had while reading your paper was like, how do these constituents, even within the survey, like how do they know about what their Black representatives are doing in Congress? Like, are they getting like this information about these, you know, these Black bills that are being sponsored or co-sponsored? And then I know, like, so I'm not sure if I even want to get into the whole debate about like what is exactly a Black bill. But I was wondering whether or not bills that are passed that are not explicitly Black, but do help with do benefit the racial group as a whole, like these stimulus checks that are supposed to be coming out any day now. Like, would that be considered a quote unquote Black bill? In reference to Figure 2, I finally figured out that those rates, the approval rates for each of the Black members of Congress, that was across time, so across the various sessions and not by race. But I was wondering whether or not if you had a graph that actually showed like the racial breakdown for those. But I think that's probably related to your future work. Let's see. I was also wondering if the non-existence of a relationship between Black bill sponsorship and approval ratings could be a consequence of polarization in Congress. And so like I was even like wondering whether or not seeing the number of Black bills that were even proposed, whether or not there was a relationship between that and, you know, whoever controlled the House at the time. Let's see, I did have questions about the Black agenda, but we're not going to do those either. Back to my original question about the constituents, I was wondering what role, if any, do you foresee or would even consider the CBC playing in this? Because I'm still really fascinated in this, like this role of the constituency, like, well, the constituents' approval, if they knew what their member of Congress were doing. And of course, we know that a lot of research, at least on my end, that says the masses don't know anything about what their elected representative is doing. And so I'm sitting here like, how can, you know, what is it that's really going on? Let's see, anything else? So like I buy your conclusion that there's no relationship. I think that this line of research is worthwhile. I think it's unique and valuable because it's providing clarification for this larger conversation about the factors that influence congressional approval ratings. So those are my comments. For Brandon and Abdul's paper, let's see. So I'm always interested in research that explores the Black monolith, and in particular, the political behaviors of Black immigrants. So from people from other aspects of the diaspora. What I am interested in your theory, perhaps, or if you'll do this in the future, if you're going to continue onward with this project, I would have loved to have heard more about any expectations or discussions of the types of differences that we would see from individuals from the continent or from Latin America, Central America, the Caribbean, et cetera. Because there I would anticipate there should be cultural differences. Let's see, I also was interested in the other values. So I know you primarily, the values in your survey, you were primarily focusing or had predicted it would either be gender, party ID, or ethnicity. But the family values, that one for myself, I thought that was a unexpected occurrence in your data. I guess I would have also, maybe in the future, perhaps if you would extend the theory or at least create a hypothesis, or it's not that hard, to look at perhaps the role of, it's not assimilation, but I'm curious to see what would have been the thoughts of individuals who would have been identified as though Black, but they would be multicultural. So like individuals who have what? one Caribbean parent and an ADOS parent. Like, so like with those mixed communities, or even within Afro-Latino, so one from the Caribbean, another one from Central America, something of that sort. But yeah, I mean, once again, the research still, like your research demonstrates that there is no Black monolith. There is still variety there, contrary to what public opinion says. So that's what I have. I guess I can open the floor for questions and comments. Both research is really dope. Go ahead, Anthony.
All right, cool. So for Dr. Matthew Platt, the first bit, and I think I missed it because I think I was writing at the time. Did you say you were going to launch a conjoint analysis, like when you filled the survey?
So I don't do any surveys. This is all this is from the CCES
Okay.
that I'm
Okay.
getting the constituent attitudes from.
Okay. Okay. Cool. I wonder if you would reconsider doing a survey. So the conjoint analysis would allow for you to vary just the like all of the characteristics, essentially blind. Like you have to conjoint analysis. I'll explain it to you. But
No, please do. I actually have no idea.
oh, okay, cool. All right, yeah. Okay, cool. So with the conjoint analysis, you take a bunch of different factors. You can take the number of bills proposed by a representative. You could put that into as one factor for the respondents to choose from. They get to choose which person do you prefer, the one on the right or one on the left. So you can vary like how many bills they propose for the Black community, where they come from, I don't know, vary their height, but the bigger thing is you could vary their ethnicity. So you'd have a small picture of the representatives. And then so you'd have respondents come in and they would choose like, okay, well, which of these two representatives would you prefer in office? And
So this would be like an embedded surveying experiment kind of thing?
Yeah, yes. And it's specifically designed to isolate like different factors that people use to decide which one is more important. They used it for immigration. You could use it for this. And it would get rid of all of those exogenous factors that like immediately come to mind. So the individual's level of education, their level of political expertise or knowledge, or how they perceive of the bills or whatever. Like you can control for all of those by essentially like varying them yourself. Like you're saying, this person posed this many bills for the Black community. How much does that matter? So you can isolate that. And the second thing, this thing I think will be pretty big, is I think your thing will hold up. But I think if you threw in an extra interaction and then looked at the people in the north, the region, the northeast, versus the people in the south, I imagine that the people in the northeast it is not sufficient to be just an African American representative, but people in the south may be more inclined to support you just for being a Black representative. The people in the northeast, if they're higher socioeconomic standing, they bump into more African Americans with higher socioeconomic standing. So seeing a representative in office, that's not enough. So yeah, just parse out the spatial differences and it'll probably pop out.
Interesting. So I'm not sure if I buy the regional argument. But maybe I do. Maybe I do. It's certainly worth exploring. Though. Yeah, I can take a look. That's what data's for, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for the suggestion.
Cheers.
From the chat, Kelly asks, also for you, Matthew, how does the racial makeup of the constituents affect the type of bills and legislation considered by congresspersons? Are the bills more symbolic? Also, how might time matter in the Blackness of the bills? For example, we may expect more bills related to Blackness in this BLM era, where there may have been less so in the early 2000s.
So in other work of mine, I did look at district composition in terms of the introduction of Black issue bills. So looking at it, going from the direction that the question suggests. And I haven't looked at that stuff in a while, but my recollection is that yes, district composition did matter, and that people from districts that had greater Black populations did, greater proportions of the population that were Black did introduce more Black issue bills. And that was controlling for, a bunch of characteristics about the member and other characteristics of the district. So I do think that could matter. In terms of, are the bills more symbolic? So I would say the answer to that kind of depends on how you conceive of bill sponsorship, right? So there are some arguments that kind of all bill sponsorship is symbolic, basically, that aside from the kind of priorities of the leadership in Congress itself, everything else is kind of just for show. And certainly in the bill sponsorship literature, a lot of what they show, there are, I think many of the people, someone like a Tracy Sulkin, for example, they wouldn't make the argument that it's all symbolic, but that certainly it is used for representational purposes, which I think is a subtle distinction. To get to Brianna's excellent point about how do constituents know about it. So I completely agree with you. I'm not operating under the assumption that members of Congress have any idea what bills, or rather that constituents have any idea what their members are introducing. I think of it more as, and what Sulkin in her research shows is that it comes up in both subtle and non-subtle ways in how members present themselves. So that people who introduce lots of agricultural bills have imagery in their commercials, for example, about agriculture, right? So that it's this ongoing relationship in some ways. Now, it might be that they're saying, well, I'm from an agricultural area, so I just want to say you're like me. But in some sense, that's kind of the whole point of it, in that it is this kind of, it's a relationship, right? That there's this feedback loop that's happening, and that there are things from the district that are going in that are shaping the member's behavior, and the member is kind of shaping how constituents view them. And so it's all kind of interacting in a big mix. And so what I'm trying to do, the whole point of this project is trying to pull some of those strings apart. I hope that answered the question, Kelly.
I was going to follow up to say, so it'd be like God Bless the Dead, John Lewis's ads when he would run for re-election, and he would of course use the civil rights imagery, that would be his way of communicating, look, I'm still sponsoring Black bills, and I'm still doing the work.
Well, so John Lewis was actually not doing the work. And so you will see he was noticeably absent from that list of top 10 sponsors of Black issue bills. So.
That's I'm just being shady. So I wanted to bring Brandon and Abdul into the conversation. I'm going to read John's second question. This, of course, your work is very interesting. Did the results vary by county, or were they pretty consistent across the counties?
Yeah, so in the research, when we collected the data, it tended to be pretty much consistent amongst the groups in their responses. And like one thing I wanted to highlight, when we did push out these surveys in the questionnaire, one unique thing that we did, we made sure that we asked the respondents to identify what they closely identify with when it came to ethnicity. So they had the option to choose and plug it in. So that's what you see is being reflected there, versus giving a list of selection and then they choosing which one they are. One study, I think that was a CMPS that an individual brought up in the last, where she messaged me, I think Dr. Melissa, I forget her last name. But I looked closely at the questionnaire that they had, and what they did was they asked if they had any ancestral connection to the different listings, whereas we're in our particular question, we tell them to put what they mostly identify as, because what we notice is that individuals can be from, like their parents can be from Nigeria or whatever have you, but they mostly identify with being African American, and that could, and we see a difference with that, because then they behave more like how Americans do that, identify with being Black, versus taking on the cultural and the different cultural and different processes that their parents would have taken on how they incorporate themselves or behave in the political realm in America. So again, that's something that gave us we put a little spin on that with that. So that's what you see in our results there. So we really went a little further, and this is why we emphasize that there needs to be a more intricate examination when looking at the Black vote, because again, we still don't say all Black people. We still looking at, we broke it down by ethnicity to see how they would respond to these different questions that we asked. So again, it's just some interesting findings there. And like you said, we're going to continue and continue this in every polling and survey that we do. Each survey is going to be broken down by ethnicity and ensuring that we capture the complexity of the Black vote when it comes to policy issues, the governor's race in Florida. Again, a lot of our research is dealing with the state of Florida. We don't expand too much outside of that, at least not right now, because we want to just have that strong expertise in Florida. And obviously, if we know the history as political science, you know the history of Florida and how that plays into electoral outcomes, especially on a national level. We saw that in 2008 and 2012. However, we don't see the same big push. We didn't see the same outcome in the 2016 and also this last one as well, 2020. Again, that speaks to another paper that we discussed in the earlier presentation.
Okay, let's see. John had a follow-up question. Were there any age or generational differences in responses? Oh, for Brandon.
Within our paper. Okay. Age and generational differences. We are kind of working on another paper with that aspect of it right now. Right now, we were just trying to tease out the hot topic right now about the 2020 preferences about voter candidates and so forth. But we have asked questions about age, gender. We have it across income. We have it across other policy issues like what they prefer. And the earlier paper we presented today, we used the same sample that we had, and we found that a lot of Black voters in the state, instead of wanting more economic type policy due to COVID and everything, which you would expect, it was more criminal justice reform, which was bringing out a more type of a shared experience when it comes to discrimination towards the economic gain in America for Black individuals and so forth. So we have more irons in the fire. We just haven't explored age and generational differences yet, but that's something we will be touching on very soon. Thank you for the question.
And just to add to Dr. Armstrong's point, again, when we were looking at, I just lost my train of thought. I was just going to add to a point you just made that we highlighted from the previous paper. Ooh, it'll come back to me. I just was going to add to that because we was talking about it earlier as far as it's escaping me. It'll come back to me and then I'll add on to that. Sorry.
Before we let Norris ask his question, I was going to say it's not surprising that criminal justice was one of the issues that your respondents identified. I was like automatically still remembering, gosh, Jordan Davis and Trayvon Martin. So it's like, of course, Florida is still, at one point in time epicenter for all of the deaths, racialized deaths that we've seen in at least this decade. So,
yeah, so that's what it was. So again, so in the pandemic. So understand, a lot of people lost jobs. And despite that, when unemployment hits American citizens, it tended to pretty much double for African Americans. And despite that, especially in Florida with job loss, and the Florida's economy is dependent on tourism. So that, when people are not flying in, then the economy goes down. And yet when we polled them, they still chose criminal justice reform over the job, like losing the unemployment, or finding employment or the economy being an issue. So again, that, and it will cross ethnicities across the board. So no matter where they were from. And again, what we go back to and what we theorize is that it's because from other research that we found was that there's a shared connectedness or shared connectedness through historical discrimination, whether you in the continent of Africa, you receive discrimination, especially from your white counterpart and so on and so forth. So is that shared connectedness that when they see things like that, especially when discrimination is happening, especially in this particular realm, when we're looking at criminal justice reform, they responded that way. So again, that just further conclude that that theory is correct, that there's a shared connectedness with Black people globally.
Oh yeah, and for one more thing I want to mention for John, we looked at employment status. So that's one of the things we looked at as well. And even across the board with employment status, it still was criminal justice reform. However, for groups who were out of work and currently looking for work, another group who was out of work but not looking for work, and self-employed individuals, they put the Florida's economy first. However, a close second was still criminal justice reform. So it was still in the back of their minds. It's still something that was shared across the board in our data set.
You can go ahead, Norris.
All right. Thank you to all the speakers. This was really interesting and informative. My question's kind of broad and it might be outside of the scope of your research, but I'm just curious about how you guys theorize this relationship between descriptive representation and maybe political trust. I found myself wondering, especially talking about like Kamala Harris and some of these people, how trust in the political system might moderate how they feel about these politicians more broadly, and how that might even be related to like their own immediate governments, like state and local governments. I mean, like I'm in grad school in the Bay Area, and so like Kamala Harris obviously means something more specific regionally here than it may mean on a broader scale. Or even if like someone is from a majority Black city where they come into contact with these Black politicians more often and trust the system less because they see Black politicians and they don't see the results from those politicians in that way. And so like, even on like a national scale, they might still be thinking, oh, maybe I care less that Kamala Harris is Black or so-and-so is Black. My mayor and city councilmen and all the people around me are Black, and I still don't see results in that way. So that was just something I was just wondering about really any of the speakers on like a theory lens of how this relationship between thinking about these Black issues and like whether these political elites descriptively represent voters might be related to how much trust they have in the political system in general, whether that's on like a local, national, state level.
So, I mean, I think in general, the finding has been that descriptive representation does increase kind of trust, but again, in a constrained way, right? Not into broader systems kind of way, but more like, you know, you feel good about having your Black face. It's interesting you talk about basically, do we get to a point where people are like, enough, it's Black enough already? Because it's interesting because, you know, I'm at an HBCU, you know, Brandon and Abdullah are HBCUs, and I hear the argument from when trying to sometimes recruit high school students, is they're like, look, I went to a Black elementary school, I went to a Black middle school, I went to a Black high school, I've done the Black school thing. Why should I go to this Black, you know, college? And so that part, that I think it touches on part of why I'm doing this project, is to try and see if is there more to it than just the symbolic nature of having that Black face there, and if so, what could that be? Is it that it's important because they show up to Black things as kind of Black cultural expressions, right? Kind of the kid touching Obama's hair. Is that what matters? Or to your point, Norris, do they say, well, if I have you here, are you doing things? And so, you know, with the bill sponsorship, I'm trying to have that. In some ways, it's a proxy for just doing stuff. Like, are there other things that you're doing? And, you know, some work in the early 2000s, I think by Christian Gross, looked at this from a constituency service point of view. And he found that it mattered there, that having your Black member mattered in terms of kind of constituency service that they gave to people. So in that sense, it's touching constituents in a very kind of real and tangible way. But thinking about it, for me, the whole conceptual framework is a weakness in my project at the moment, and it's something I just in general need to give more thought to. So I appreciate your question, because it's forcing me to give it that thought.
Anthony, did you wait first? Abdullah, Brandon, did you want to respond to Norris's comment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question to ask. That's something we try to grapple with as well. Looking at previous work by Frederick Harris, The Price of the Ticket, looking at Obama, his presidency, of how we actually paid a price for having him in office. Yes, he was a Black individual. He represented us at the highest level of office, but at the same time, when it comes to substantive type policy issues and getting things passed for specifically the Black community, we kind of missed the ballpark on that. So it has a it's a great experience having the first Black president. However, it's a little sour because we didn't get anything specifically directly to us. If you look at some of the measures that was passed during his presidency, and the book highlights it, it talks about how every other specific group received something. However, with the Black community, we got a head nod and a wink and jokes during speeches and so forth. So it's a risk and take, because you want somebody in office, but then individuals who get in office, they don't feel like they want to be too Black per se, if that, for lack of a better term. It's just something I just want to share.
Anthony, did you still want to ask your question, or?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's necessarily a question. For both of the surveys, I'm really curious about how this holds up outside of just the American context. I think your theory will hold up overseas as well. I don't know if you guys do IR at all, but this is huge. Like, so in international relations, when you look at regime support or democratic backsliding, or just differences in how much democratic sentiment across different regimes, or across ethnicities, like there's really no like coherent like theory as to why like certain ethnicities, particularly minorities, still support the regime or fail to support the regime. I'd be curious at how yours stacks up. So if you guys were to use like the World Value Survey and then observe African Americans versus the other minorities and other like contexts throughout the world, I'm curious if this is a unique thing for us, like after having gone through like an oppressive cycle, or just being within the Black community, just the racial consciousness that is here. If this is not something anywhere else in the world, or if this is something that there's a through line with other minority communities. I don't know if you guys have thought about it or whatever, but I'm really curious.
Yeah, I mean, to that last point you made, and some of the research that we found that this is one of the Blacks overall, I mean, I won't just say globally, but Blacks in this context, when they compared it to other minority groups, they only really, for the most part, saw Black people responding kind of unisonly when it came to issues of like race or discrimination that way. And that it varied, the paper said it varied amongst other minority groups. It wasn't the same shared connectedness that we saw when looking at Black people, regardless of the ethnicity. So again, that's something that's there, and again, that's something to look into as well. So I mean, as far as like looking at it globally and doing some international studies and surveys to see if we get the that same shared response when they look at different regimes or governments.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The overarching thrust of how I think about things is that Black people investing so heavily in Black electoral representation was a tactical error. And so I think it has not yielded all of the benefits, and that perhaps even contributes to a complacency is, I think, the wrong word, but it's perhaps satiated things that were not satisfied. And I think that's kind of just a broader Black politics problem. And so I wonder if thinking comparatively, I think in terms, so I'm by no means an expert in any of this, or familiar with it, really, but I think there is literature and studies that look at kind of co-ethnics in office in like sub-Saharan Africa and things like this, where they find that it matters a great deal to not just the sense of support for the regime, but also in the reverse, in that because of kind of clientelist policies of various sorts, that it matters in a very tangible lived experience way to have your co-ethnic in office, because they will be able to provide more resources where the state doesn't have the same kind of infrastructure and stability that we might experience in something like the United States. And so in that sense, I would say conceptually, it's maybe you'd have to choose the right comparison. And so I know we have lots of people at INCOPE who study like Brazil and do that comparatively to the United States. That might be the kind of place to look for it as more similar, where the basic governments are more similar. The histories, while distinct, are more parallel to one another. That might be a good test case to see, does descriptive representation in Brazil matter in the way that we think it matters in the United States? And I think that's an interesting question.
I guess I had one more question for you, Matthew. Did you see any differences in approval ratings for Black male members of Congress versus female? The N may not have been large enough.
I think the N. Did I look? Let's see if I looked. I did control for gender. Did gender matter? I don't think it mattered in a way that I cared about, but that might be because I'm part of patriarchy.
I'm not a gender person, but my students would have asked, and I'm like, I have to tell the babies. So.
And actually, even looking at it, I think that's gender at the constituent level, not the member level. So that's something to think about. You mentioned that figure too. That for those, it show kind of the over time approval ratings by party for every Black member of Congress. And part of me wants to just take time and just kind of go through that figure and figure out what's going on member by member as a way, as a kind of inductive process, to think like what should be kind of the next steps and thinking through. But I feel like it probably, I think it could in the sense that I don't think there's been a Black member of Congress that generates the same kind of right-wing reaction of someone like a Maxine Waters. Like, I don't think there are Black male members of Congress who are used as kind of conservative boogeymen in the same way. And so I wonder if that might be a gendered response.
It could be. I mean, because I'm sitting here like, well, Maxine Waters is, of course, at the forefront, but I was also thinking about Barbara Lee. And it's a shame that you started at 05, but like I would have been curious to see, the role Cynthia McKinney would have had.
Right.
Like she was the boogeyman for a little while, and she was
absolutely
a lot younger.
Cynthia McKinney, I think, right? You think of Trump's whole kind of dusted with like Frederica Wilson at one point, and so yeah, I think it could definitely be a thing. I think it could definitely be a thing.
I was like really surprised for, the momentary blips of Hurd, Love, and West that, even their nonpartisan was higher than I thought it would be. But I know that Mia Love was only there one term, and Hurd, even though 2 years, he was still very like laid low. And Tim Scott, like he refuses to join the CBC, and he still has relatively high approval ratings by, Democrats. And I was just like, really? So he's weird. We can sit here. I can talk all day about like the unicorns that are Black Republicans and how sketch they are. But,
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, as I try to build up the broader data set, those are things I'd like to take a look at, to just focus and take a deep dive just on Black Republicans, because they take different postures, right? So like someone like Alan West is like, I want no parts of it. Whereas like a J.C. Watts, when he was in Congress, is more like a Tim Scott at least wants to appear to be. And I think perhaps to some extent it is, right? Where they're like, yes, I'm conservative, but I am Black, and I don't run away from the fact that I'm Black. I just think that some of Black people's problems can be solved through conservative measures.
I mean, but you won't join the CBC, but you're doing this criminal justice work. Like, I don't know. He's trying to be like situationally Black. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think that's well stated. Yeah.
Did anyone else have any questions or comments? Were there gender differences in y'all's paper, Brandon and Abdul? I'm trying to recall. I don't know if you said anything about it.
Yeah, so we did test for gender, and we noticed that there were so again when we looked at party affiliation, we did see some individuals were discouraged by the choice of Kamala Harris, but again that more fell like on party lines, and that's those women that did that that was discouraged. And then we had an interesting response with the no influence. So again, and it fell a little bit about the lines of those in the state of Florida, and I think Georgia has it too, the non-party affiliates versus independent, where they just see both parties as the problem. And so again, that's where we probably see the no influence there. Yeah, so we did look at gender, and it wasn't monolithic in that sense as well amongst Black women, regardless of ethnicity. So you see it was some variances there, some differences there. So again, we did test for that. So gender, party affiliation, and ethnicity among the Black vote.
By chance, did you all have a large? Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
I was about to say, we also found that when it comes to like policy issues, they prefer female Black voters. They were more inclined for more education type reform, and for male Black voters, they were more leaning towards voting rights issues.
Right.
Voting rights issues, and that was following criminal justice reform and what was the second leading highest? Criminal justice reform and Florida's economy. Yeah, Florida's economy. Yeah, so the female Black voters, they was more leaning towards K-12 education policy. More of that needs to be enacted, whereas male Black voters, they was leaning more towards voting rights issues.
Yeah, and some of the things that we were looking at, and again, this is something just from the findings we can suggest to where that them choosing voting rights versus men choosing voting rights and the females choosing K-12 education. Again, if we look at their top choices, so criminal justice reform, typically when you do become incarcerated, especially if you serve terms, you're stripped of that, and it tends to negatively impact Black males, although Black women are impacted as well. So they can be those individuals who relate to, and Florida recently passed, although they pushed back on it, recently passed those who were recently incarcerated had the ability to have their rights restored, and that was pushed by the voters in the state and had that pass through not referendum, but initiative that was put on the ballot through petitioning to get the votes to put on the ballot. So again, but how it was pushed back, the Republican Party in our state created another loophole or added another thing to that, to where you had to go through the courts and things of that nature. So, but again, that's something that we've been finding a lot of different things that we can continue to pull from this survey that we conducted. So, and as we can continue to conduct as more elections go on, especially throughout the state.
And with sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I had another question.
Okay, yeah, with so we want to explore household status as well, marital status, because that K-12 education aspect for females is very interesting because of children, like just overgeneralizing children and black women. We need to do more research into it, just the connection between Black women and their kids and so forth in the state of Florida as a big issue.
So I was going to ask you guys about this criminal justice reform finding, because so my hypothesis is that it's become, it's kind of a know-nothing pop culture issue, which is not to say that it's not a real problem. It is, but perhaps you've experienced this with your students, like that I have, that when I just, like, if I'm talking to my students in class, it's the thing that they will bring up as well, but it's because they don't know anything. And so they care about it, but also it's the only thing that they know about. And so I wonder, am I being too harsh on the American people? Or do you think there's something there? But by which I mean, like, you don't have to engage in political sources to hear things about criminal justice, right? That it in your, just like, you can just, if you listen to music, you watch television and all sorts of, you can just live your regular life and you get messages that mass incarceration is a problem. It's kind of, it's in the zeitgeist in a way that other issues aren't, or that require you to, in order to form an opinion about it, you have to kind of do a little bit more of something to figure out what's really going on there. So I wonder what you guys think of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's one of the things we were discussing back and forth with. But the thing that stood out the most to us was the pandemic. Like, the election happened in 2020. National polling trends from the Pew Research Center and all these other polling institutions are showing that Black people are hit the hardest by the pandemic when it comes to health wise, when it comes to job wise and so forth, employment and so forth. However, at the end of the day, they are still talking about criminal justice. So we was talking about criminal justice is a hot topic now. As you just said, like, people who don't know anything about politics, they know about criminal justice issues because that was covered on the news and so forth. However, at the same time, everywhere you turn, everywhere you look, we know that COVID is here. And COVID is going to be here for a while. And people are being impacted. People are waiting for government type of assistance. And they still didn't go with the economy. They still kept saying criminal justice reform. So we're still trying to tease out some of that information of why that is the case. But that's a great way to think about it. But we need to look more into that as well.
Does Florida know COVID's here?
Yeah, and looking at prior research, and this is where the way how we surveying, we wanted to. This is why we have so much. We go a deep dive into looking at Black opinions, and their voting behavior, because we want to examine even older studies where when they did poll, and we did look at those I think it was like a 10-year, they from like 2000 to 2010, and then now from 2010 to 2020. Again, when you look closely at it, are they asking the right question? Again, and that could be the case too as well. To where we purposely looked at we looked at it to say, okay, what are their concerns? Let's ask these particular questions that would really be concerning around for Black folks. And again, of course, the economic question was there. We talked about Florida economy, but again, the national survey tend to just look at overall voters, and then they just said, this is what it is. We will ask these questions this way, where we actually putting on the lens of people of African descent and polling them that way. And this is where, you get a closer or a better understanding of the findings or of the opinions of Black folks. So again, and this is what we found. Again, that's an interesting point. We'll look into that, see if it's just a hot button issue that needs responding to. But historically, from the research, we're just showing that this has been the case. Black persons' interaction, especially in Florida. Florida's had a unique, not a unique history, but a consistent history. If you know about the race riots in Ocoee, Tallahassee, the Orlando area, Miami-Dade area, where it's been a long withstanding bad relationship with policing in this state. And up until now, this constant negative interaction with policing and Black folks within the state, as many other southern states as well. But Florida, especially with the Stand Your Ground law, Martin Luther Anderson, with Trayvon, like, it's been a constant thing in Florida, and I think it's pretty consistent in their response. So I won't say that but again, we still need to investigate and look into that if it's just a hype thing, which from our research, in previous research and what we was concluding, we think it's pretty consistent, especially with the history in Florida.
Well, it looks like we've reached our time. So hand clap or click the hand clap emoji, and let's thank our panelists for this lovely session. So you all have nice evenings, enjoy your weekend, enjoy the rest of NCOPES, and I will see you, I guess, next time when we're in person. Woo.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
Brianna.
you. No problem. Bye.
Thank you, Randy. You have a good one.
You too.
Take care.